Joining us now to unpack this, we have Chinan Dickwell, Vice Chair, African Energy Council, joining me from Accra. Great to have you on the show. Good morning.
Good to see you. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. How's Ghana? How's Africa all week? How's it moving along? It started yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a bit rainy, slightly overcast at the moment, I'd say. So not too bad. But certainly, I think that the optimism and the vibe is electric. This is the first time that the Africa Oil Week is moving into West Africa. You would know that for the last decades, it was in Cape Town in South Africa. The very first time we're doing it here in West Africa, so much closer to home, much closer to a lot of what's happening here. So very optimistic and a huge amount of buzz for sure. Lots of CEOs are here. Our very own, the GMD of NNPC, is here, and several others from the West African region. It's been very exciting.
Yeah, so, Africa Oil Week, often described as a deal-making hub. From your perspective, what are the key themes and opportunities emerging this year?
That's a great question, Lanny. So for this year, like I said, first time in Ghana, but you're 100% right. M&A is a big theme for this year, mergers and acquisitions, but also farm-ins. We're seeing huge amounts of that happening across Africa and the licensing round. So there'll be huge announcements that we expect for new licensing rounds. There'll be huge announcements, I think, for new M&A deals that people are putting out there. But also outside of that, I think is also capital attraction. So you would know there's also a place where we have big sort of pitches that people make, for new capital. We're seeing the new basins like the one in Ghana, the Voltian Basin, trying to attract new capital. We expect as well that a lot of the financiers, Afrexim Bank, African Development Bank, some of the huge multilaterals, all of them will be coming in to try to finance a big project. But I think one thing that's also unique about Africa All Week are the technical deep dives. And to be honest, in many of these conferences, sometimes you go there and we get lost in where's the capital, where's the M&A, where's the big thing happening. Sometimes the technical deep dives where we go into detail about what's happening in a particular basin and what we can learn and extrapolate to the next basin is often missing. There will be a lot of technical deep dives, that I know for a fact, and that starts today.
And we keep, talking about a just transition, for Africa, from dirty alternatives. How do you see Africa, balancing the global shift to cleaner energy with the continent's heavy reliance on oil and gas revenues? But it also seems, when it comes to that shifting away from dirty oils, we're seeing that narrative kind of slowing down in 2025. Do you think so?
Dan, I agree with that. And I think you and I have spoken about this many times. I think for lots of ways, I want to say, you described it really well, Laddie. There's a bit of a tension there. How do you monetize your, natural resources and make sure that it returns value for development for your country? But how do you do that in a responsible way? So that tension was always there. But I think you're right. Over the last few years, we've seen that slow down quite a lot. Why? Because many countries have pushed back. Some of the targets were unrealistic, that for a fact. Also, we've seen a big push from the US. Donald Trump has torn the rule book. We know that for a fact. And because of that, many banks really started to pivot away. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Citigroup, all the companies that really took big positions on this front started to exit. And you know that once capital starts to exit, the narrative would slow down. So it is an opportunity for Africa still that we need to think about monetizing these resources in a very, very clever way. But we need to do that in a responsible way that returns value. The the S in ESG, environmental, social, and governance, that S there is so important. It's often the one that is overlooked. Some people pay attention to the E, yes, but the S there, returning value to the general population, is something that I see that is very missing and something we need to think about very cleverly.
And talking about something to think about, we see Nigeria recently moved to amend the Petroleum Industry Act, shifting certain powers, to the Ministry of Finance Incorporated as MOFI. How do you think this will affect, investor confidence and the role of the NNPC Limited? I know investors there would also be keeping an eye on this.
Yeah, Laddie, so this is what you're describing there. This is just the proposed amendment that came out of, I think the announcement came out of the Office of the Attorney General, having got assent from the President. Of course, the whole proposal to amend the PIA came from the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. Honestly, at this stage, it's very early days. We're getting the key facts, and I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but I'll comment on it very specifically. We're getting the key facts around this, but there are a few things that stand out, and I want everyone to wrap their heads around it. Just so you know, currently how it stands is we have the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Corporation, NUPRC, who is very much sort of the regulator, if you like. So NUPRC is the old EPR. It's the regulator in the space. Its job mainly is from a, it used to be just from a technical standpoint, looking at reviewing and approving field development plans. What that means is this new development before, it goes into FEED, detailed design and FID, NUPRC would work across the board to make sure that it makes sense in terms of development and all the way into FID. That used to be their job. Now, lately, from the new executive order we saw this year, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu gave them more powers in the cost efficiency executive order. So what that meant now is that they will start to publish cost benchmarks. Once they publish those cost benchmarks and a company satisfies it, they get a tax exemption. So that's really, really great. Now, from NNPC side, so this is NUPRC. From the NNPC side, NNPC has always been the commercial entity that represents Nigeria in all the model contracts. What does that mean? It means if you have a joint venture for the Nigeria between Shell and the Nigerian government, it would not be the Nigerian government, it would be NNPC that would represent Nigerian government in there. If you have a production sharing contract, again, it would be the NNPC that will represent Nigeria in there. The new proposal that's come out has changed that entirely. It gives huge powers to NUPRC to continue to be the regulator in the space, but also to take on the commercial role of representing Nigeria in those contracts. So it's almost like a player referee. The NUPRC now becomes the player referee in that space. There are several implications to it, and I'll say a few. One, I can see the sense in doing this. It plugs some of the financial leakages that we see. It makes our fiscal terms more robust, and it removes over-invoicing, misalignment in terms of implementing the PIA and all of that. It removes that. I can see that, and potentially would return value from a financial standpoint. But Ladi, the other part of this is from a governance standpoint, there could be huge implications. Because all of a sudden, the second part of the amendment says that the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, which is what we have right now, it leaves, it vacates its position as one of the owners of NNPC. NNPC literally moves into the Ministry of Finance Incorporated 100%. And because of that, if the Ministry of Finance takes that over, it almost makes the NNPC board redundant. And that's a problem for independence. A board is meant to be completely independent. Their decisions and their guidance is meant to be entirely independent. Once you change that and put it under a ministry, it completely has a different spin to it. All of a sudden, you're coming into bureaucracy. All of a sudden, you're coming into governance challenges because they will be implementing positions from the ministry. So I think from that standpoint, there are governance challenges. And for me, I'd say this. Mainly from an IPO standpoint, we've been told that NNPC would IPO in 2028, and they're working towards that. I can tell you this, with this challenge, with this new amendment, personally, I think it makes IPO a lot more difficult. So I'm not sure what the headspace there is. We at the African Energy Council are still trying to understand it. We're still trying to work out what the key implications of it is, but I can see very clearly, financially, from a loss, from a leakage standpoint, we're plugging it without a doubt. But I think from a governance standpoint, honestly, it sounds to me that there's going to be huge conflict there without a doubt. So these are just two changes. There are other changes as well, of course, to it. So if you look at Section 8, I've just spoken about Section 8 of the PIA. That role moves from NUPRC, from NNPC into NUPRC. There's also Section 85, I think, of the PIA. There's kind of change as well, and several other ones that have moved.
All right.
Ladi, did you get that?
Yeah, I got it. So, definitely trying to plug those leakages there. That means taking the finances, running of the finances of the NNPCL, that moves to the Ministry of Finance. That means the NNPCL will make all of that money, will hand it over to the Ministry of Finance, and that way we can enjoy the benefits of, our oil and, refineries and all of that. But does this inspire confidence for investors, in your opinion, or is there a huge risk there?
Yeah, so this is the point I make. This is when if I just focus on investors, this does not inspire investor confidence, because if you're going to put your hand in your pocket and take out money to invest in NNPC, you want to know that there's going to be very little political interference, there's going to be very little government interference. What this does is it takes NNPCL and puts it squarely under the ministry. So it comes into bureaucracy, it comes under the guidance of people who would simply be looking at the business of oil and gas simply from a commercial, financial sense. Operationally, it's a completely different ballgame. You know, the operation of oil and gas is a completely different ballgame. It's not always just a financial play. So there is that tension in there. But I'll say this as well, you know, when you look at how it is set up, being a player referee, you know, it's not an easy role to play. It's not an easy role to play. But without a doubt, you look at this as well. Think about this. A couple of years ago, we had the central bank governor say that $20 billion was missing from NNPC. This change here would solve that, would solve those kind of opacity without a doubt, because all of a sudden, the person who is the regulator is also the player on the field. So you get consistent implementation. You get there very clearly a fact that when the revenue comes in, it gets moved into MOFI. You know, the Ministry of Finance incorporated. There's not going to be, you know, all of that opacity and lack of transparency. That's number one. Number two, NUPRC would be the person responsible for looking at all invoices. So things like over-invoicing will be a thing of the past, because they set the laws. They set the laws, and therefore they will be implementing that very, very rigorously. They would also be the ones looking at every contract to see what the contractor is claiming. So all the, you know, for cost recovery, what's the contractor claiming? They will be the one to validate. In the past, they would set the rule and they would sit back, and then NNPC would interpret that rule. Now, that disparity between this is what we said and this is how it should be done was always there. It led to a lot of money bleeding through. In today's world, under this situation, you get a consistent application of that. And I think that's very attractive. But I keep going back to the same thing. Are we sure we're going to IPO in 2028? Because this new setup takes us further away from it. If you're going to IPO under the circumstances, you will not attract top dollar. I can tell you that for a fact, because many people would look at the government structure, and they'll be turned away from it. You've just appointed a board of industry professionals who lots of us have voted as, you know, the best of the best, and all of a sudden these guys are going to be redundant. You know, because all of a sudden the power moves to MOFI. So I think these are some of the considerations for us to think about.
Well, a lot to consider there before making these amendments. Now, but let's look at it from a continental perspective. Now, how do you think African, you know, producers preparing for the long-term reality, how do you think they're preparing, you know, for that reduced global oil demand that most of the big boys are projecting, you know, at this time going forward?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a big reality for us in terms of Africa. You know, our reliance, or particularly Nigeria, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, partly Ghana, you can argue, now Senegal, now Mauritius. You know, these countries are producing huge amounts of, you know, sort of petroleum products. So the forecast is, of course, that, you know, crude oil demand is going to be destroyed. When I say destroyed, I mean go down in the short term. So we have to start to look at that in a very, very serious way and think about the alternatives to it. In the context of Nigeria, you know, I keep talking about this and I can't say enough of it. What Dangote is doing is huge because he retains value for us. We produce here, we refine it here. The guy in Lekki is paid a salary in Lagos. He pays his tax in Lagos, and ultimately that grows the economy. So we're retaining value. What we're exporting, like we did to the US 2 months ago, the products we sent to the US 2 months ago, the ones he sent to Saudi Arabia, to Singapore, all of those are finished products. They would consume there, but all of the value has been retained in here. So I think this is how to start to think about it. How much of the value of these petroleum products can you start to retain in here and start to, you know, reduce the cushion from simply commodity type products that are affected by global prices. So that's number one. I think Nigeria is slightly going in that regard, and I can see that. That's very exciting. Without a doubt, though, we need to start to think about regulation that's coming. There is a regulation called Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It's called CBAM. It's out in Europe at the moment. Once you export any product and it has a higher carbon footprint, they will tax you accordingly. So many of the businesses in Nigeria need to start to internalize that, how you can still remain tax competitive under those scenarios and those situations. But without a doubt, it's something. This question you asked, Ladi, I can tell you for a fact, is one that dominates the Africa All Week today and tomorrow. Is one we're considering quite a lot.
Fantastic. Well, we'll keep tracking all of that and what's playing out right there in Accra. Thank you so much, Chinadekwa, Vice Chair, African Energy Council. It's great having your perspective this morning.
Thanks. Thank you.